Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott and Dr. Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott, and I am joined in person together again, like the Muppets song of yore, with my co-host, Dr. Richard Leduc.
It's actually Richard Dr. Leduc.
It's
you said it right.
Dr. Richard Doctor. He wants to make sure we get the doctor, and so it's Dr. Richard Dr. Leduc. Doctor. It's
Senior.
Yeah, Esquire.
Hello, Garrett. Thanks for having me back. We have so much to get to in this week's episode.
And we'll get to none of it.
There's no time for banter.
We've been trying to answer a question for 3 weeks. Well, frankly, we've been trying to answer a question for 4 years.
Yes. Any question.
We've done horribly.
So yes, this relates to Hindus and Buddhists, and just me saying that increases the likelihood that we'll talk about it in this episode.
We're not going to talk about it.
I think it is a mildly interesting question that we could get to potentially.
But we won't. All right, let's go.
All right. Jumping straight into the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag.
Oh, wait. I want to give a shout out to someone I saw at one of Kai's basketball games.
Yes.
Tony, who is a listener and recognized me, unfortunately. It's a bad day. Kai's been super sick, like he had pneumonia, so he can't breathe at all.
Now that hurts for conditioning.
Yeah, it makes it pretty rough to run.
Does.
I've always said that.
And I wouldn't know anything about that. I've never ran in my life.
You've never ran anywhere?
No.
Okay.
Why would a person run unless they're being chased?
That's true. Well, on the mission they used to say you don't have to run faster than the dog or the person chasing you with a knife.
Just your companion.
You just have to run faster than your companion.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, that's some good missionary lore for you. Speaking of missionaries, sometimes we have people email saying, "How do we get our child on the?" No missionary actually emails, because why would they want it? But parents desperate to send something to their missionaries, for their birthday or something. All we need is for you to email the podcast at questions at standardtruthpodcast.com. We made it a really long email to make it very difficult.
You can click on the link in the description. Right. It is there.
And just send in the request with their missionary.org email. And then we will get them on a Google Drive and
they can access them. So I actually had an experience with some missionaries yesterday. I saw missionaries that looked like they were heading to a restaurant. I chased them down. I followed them.
Yeah.
And
this isn't creepy yet?
No, not at all. And so my wife, every time she sees missionaries, she always, they're always got their hand out. They're always asking for stuff.
Missionaries. They're just money grubbers. That's why instead of going to school or working, they've sacrificed 2 years of their life. That's why.
Well, she always, and I'm like, I'm in a hurry. I'm always like Ebenezer Scrooge going to the market. I don't have time to talk to Tiny Tim or anybody. I've got business to do.
So you see missionaries and you go, bah, humbug.
Pretty much.
Missionary work's a humbug.
And she always responds, your son is on a mission. How would you feel if someone treated your son? And I'm like, okay.
Like, well, he's been robbed 17 times. I'm actually being a lot better than
yeah. I'm not robbing them. That's
yeah.
But I think she meant our son in Spain. He never was robbed. Well, he was kind of robbed once.
Plus, he's home from his mission now. So that was just PTSD.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm like, it softens me every time. So now when I see missionaries, I'm like, all right, because my son's coming home in a couple of weeks, and I will have no sons on missions. And it's way more expensive to have kids not on missions than on missions. But anyway, so they went to a restaurant and I pulled in and I'm like, hey, you know what, guys, I got your dinner or whatever. And they're like, oh, that's very nice, thank you. And I was like, I should tell them about the podcast. And
you were prompted?
No.
Okay,
This was
yeah.
not the Spirit.
Yeah, okay.
Elder Bednar gave a really great talk about whether it's the Spirit or whatever. If it's something good, just do it.
But in this
Quit
case,
trying to
since
parse
it was not something good, it was couldn't have been from God.
Yeah, right. No, it certainly wasn't. So I went to try. So it's tough when you're trying to tell them about a podcast that you're on and trying to make
Right.
it not seem like an enormous idiot or jerk about
it's
it.
kind of like when people will come up to me to talk to me about a book, and I'm like, oh, I'm not really familiar with that book, and then I find out it's a self-published book
That they wrote.
Right. And it's like, oh, okay, you know.
So halfway through the attempted description of the podcast and telling them that I'll give it to them for free, the look on their faces was one of, I'm familiar with that look. I have children.
Yeah. So it was, what do we have to say to this guy to get him to stop talking to us?
But they didn't have to say anything. The look on their face was like, you know what? You guys enjoy your dinner. Have a good one. And I just left. I pulled the ripcord mid description of the podcast and just turned around and left.
Right. So you didn't even tell them they could get the podcast.
I was in the middle of it. They didn't want it, and it was
Okay.
That was a go. Anyway, so there you go. This email comes to us from Liz. The subject: Mom of the girl from the Chili's restaurant. My daughter was forced to listen to continuous episodes of the Standard of Truth podcast as I drove her to BYU, Idaho from Arizona this past January. My goodness.
Wow. Yeah,
even if she's going from Flagstaff, that's still a haul.
I still feel like there are planes. I guess you can't get your stuff up
there, yeah.
But
it's a long drive, and hours into the show, she was curious what Garrett looked like. So
you don't want to know.
So she yoo-hooed it, his image.
Yoo-hooed.
Weeks later, which is the best.
Speaking of which, Leslie Ryan sent us 2 cases of Yoo-hoo chocolate drink, or are they even allowed to call it a drink?
They're not allowed to call it chocolate.
It's not milk.
It's like when Oreo had to change the spelling of cream because it wasn't cream.
It's creme now.
Yeah,
as if they're French.
It's lard that's white.
Well,
yeah.
A Yoo-hoo,
which, by the way, delicious. By the way, just for the record.
I mean, is it
Oreos?
Oh, Oreos are great.
No, Yoo-hoo's garbage.
So look, I tried drinking some of the Yoo-hoo. I hadn't had one for a while. I put it in the fridge for 48 hours. 48 hours. I took it out immediately. I didn't take it out and set it there. I took it out immediately.
It was warm.
Put the straw in it. Began drinking it. It was 80 degrees. I don't know. I personally don't understand the physics behind how something that is water cannot get cold. You can't drink Yoo-hoo cold. It won't get cold.
No.
So I put it in the freezer. That's my next, and then I'm going to see if I can get it to freeze. What I'm imagining is that it has like a freezing point somewhere. It's in the Kelvin scale.
Yeah.
And I have to figure out
Yeah.
where that point is.
Yeah,
so
negative 270 Celsius.
I need to drink it just above that, and then I think it'll be good.
Well, regardless, it was a very thoughtful gift.
Yes. I mean, look, Leslie and Ryan are awesome. Leslie's one of the funniest people anyone's ever met.
Our ward has a youth conference coming up. I'll be taking them up to that, and I'll be sharing it with the youth. And they'll say, "What's this?" I'm like, "It's chocolate milk."
And they'll say, "Why is it 80 degrees?"
How hot does it get? Because it also doesn't have a boiling point. That's the problem.
I feel
no
like,
freezing point. It's got a viscosity.
Like the properties of mercury, where it's impossible to get to a solid state, and it can't become a gas either. I don't know. I mean, look, Becky loves this stuff.
She grew up on it.
Yeah,
she loves it.
But she doesn't go buy it and drink it, does she? It's
no. I have a job now, and so we were able to.
That's funny. I was just talking to one of the other basketball moms during the game, and we were talking about how we used to eat things like sloppy joes and Hamburger Helper, because someone was like, "Oh, we'll make sloppy joes for all the boys," and I'm like, "Nope," and she said the same thing. Like, "No, yeah, of course we used to eat that." We were forced to, and Angie was like, "Yeah, I remember I suggested some Hamburger Helper to someone the other day." And then I was like, I don't know if I could really do that again. Look, for years it's all we ate.
Hamburger helper was great.
Yeah, now we're living high on the hog and eating the prepackaged lunch meats that are 79 cents at Walmart. So
It's funny. So my wife feels that way about manwich with sloppy joes.
I cannot stand
So
sloppy joes.
my sister-in-law, she likes a good manwich. And so when we'd get together as family, big family, she would say, "Oh, make sloppy joes." My wife has gone out of the way to hide the manwich that was in her pantry so that we would have to do something else for dinner.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I like beef.
Sure.
You can do almost anything to beef. Literally just throwing it into the frying pan and cooking it up as just seasoned beef that is better than turning it into manwich.
Oh yeah, manwiches.
Or frankly, any sloppy joes. I'm not a fan.
Oh, you're not a fan?
I would rather die.
Okay. I like a decent sloppy joe.
No, you don't. Okay, let me ask you this question. Do you ever say, I wish I had a sloppy joe instead of a hamburger? Do you ever say that?
No one's ever said that.
Okay, so no one's ever said the words, I can't wait to get me a sloppy joe.
No, you come home and what do we sloppy joes?
And you tolerate it.
No,
Yeah.
no, thank you. Thank you for making sloppy joes.
I mean, look, there's a lot of things I still like from when I was newly married and Angie and I lived in a 200 square foot apartment. Like I still like ramen noodle.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I still like milk. Yeah.
Sure.
But even then I couldn't afford Yoo-hoo. Who could go buy a chocolatey water drink?
Weeks later, she went on a girls' trip to Utah and heard, this is Liz's email.
Oh, back to Liz's email.
Yes.
Liz probably doesn't have an opinion on you.
No. Weeks later, she went on a girls' trip to Utah and heard him talking so loud with his friends at the Chili's. Immediately, she recognized the face and matched Garrett's distinct voice. She took a selfie and called her mom, who's a fan, because I know nothing historical unless it's scandalous and or explained in a super interesting way. Side note, I'd worry about grammatical errors, but since Richard can't read, and I teach, which I've already flubbed several times, and I teach high school math, who's going to be checking? Well, no one is. Also, it's May, so literally no one cares about anything. No, that's the most teacher thing I've ever.
She's a teacher.
That's my wife's the same thing. Yeah. She's like, I have 3 more days, and anyway. Just ask my 17-year-old students if, in fact, you can capture their attention. I was listening to the episode about babies in Mongolia versus infants born in America or Europe and the difference in their salvation, and it got me thinking. Remember the 1990s youth firesides? We'd be told things like, just think of all the families you could have been born to, and yet you've been born in America to a family that's already members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think in the 90s we would have said that are Mormon, but
yeah.
You're so lucky and chosen. Fast forward to 2025, that sounds crazy, exclusionary, and like everyone else, was less than. Get it? Like less than in math. That's a It's a math
Only a
joke.
math teacher can make that joke.
Or think that it would be funny enough to put it into an email.
Look, Blaise Pascal would be like, you know what? Okay.
You know what, Liz? Yeah, it's well done. That's witty. I'm just kidding, Liz. That is very funny.
Pythagoras. We have to go back to Pythagoras.
If they were born in some other country to a non-believing family, yet in the 90s, I had no reason to doubt that I was a little bit luckier than others because of my birth circumstances. The Mongolia versus white baby discussion sounds oddly familiar to that concept. Did we grow up low-key Calvinists? Yikes. Also, gracias. That's Spanish for thank you.
Thank you for estimating my poor multilingual skills.
For what you do each week, it helps me understand Jesus and Joseph in ways that decalvinize my past. That's an interesting perspective to think about.
Well, so I understand where the person's coming from. I mean, look, if you are a Latter-day Saint, I mean, I've often thought that at least for this mortality, I am lucky that I was born into a Latter-day Saint family, because frankly, I doubt that I would have believed otherwise. I mean, I would have been, pretty skeptical of the missionaries running from Richard and the restaurant trying to have him sell the podcast.
Guys, it's free. You're gonna love it.
Come back. And then they saw me on the street, and they're like, "Hey, would you like to learn about Jesus?" I'm like, "No, not from you. Who's that crazy guy chasing you?" I mean, I understand the sentiment behind it, right? That like we should be very, very, very grateful that we have the gospel. And I'll tell you what, you only have to talk to people who've converted to the church later in life, and they are so grateful to have the gospel in their life. And they sometimes will say things like, people who've had it aren't grateful enough for it.
My mom often helps to provide me with a perspective, as she grew up Jewish and only later in life was introduced to the church, that she didn't have primary, she didn't have all of these things that I took for granted as a young man. She's like, you don't even know what you have.
Yeah, you don't know the power of the dark side. That's what it sounded like she was going to say.
Yes, the Emperor.
Emperor Palpatine. Your mom always quoting Emperor Palpatine, much like my mom. Garrett's mom, always, if it's the Emperor, she's there. So, I mean, in some ways, I think you could see how that'd be carried too far, because God does not love us, people who are born into the church, any more than he loves everyone else. And that, which actually kind of proves the point. And I believe this was from Christy. So we've got a lot of.
Well, this is from Liz.
Oh, okay, Liz.
Yes,
okay,
yeah,
Liz.
we're about to get to Christy's corner.
I forgot.
Christy's corner is coming around the corner.
It's coming around the corner. So Liz, I think I understand what those people were trying to say, and I certainly heard the same things. If people felt like that meant that God loved us more, or that we were somehow better, I think then that obviously led us to this belief that was erroneous and that was false. Because God does love everyone. He is no respecter of persons. And the beauty of our gospel is that we actually legitimately have a way that everyone will actually be treated equally. Now, they won't be treated equally in mortality, and that is the reality. The reality is that kid who grows up, who never hears about the gospel, lives his whole life and dies, he will have in reality spent 70 years of mortality not having the answers that we have. And God, in his infinite wisdom, and Jesus through the atonement, will be able to perfectly determine the salvation and the standing of that person. And so, yeah, I mean, it is unfair in the sense that someone goes without that knowledge. And yet we know that somehow God will make everything right in the eternities to come. But yeah, it is unfortunate if we start to go down low-key Calvinist road. I mean, that the beauty of the gospel is that in this life or the next, everyone will have an equal opportunity, not just at salvation, because we already know it's coming for basically everybody, but exaltation, where everyone has an equal opportunity to go to the celestial kingdom.
I do think there's elements of that, though, that do leak their way into some of the prosperity theology and things, which is part of the reason I hate it so much. I mean, if you've served a foreign mission, or you have a child to serve, or you've spent any time around people that live in humble circumstances that are far better than you and have far more faith, and cling to this idea of if they only were more righteous that they would live in a mansion. Yeah. It makes you very angry.
Yeah. So, and that is, I do think that is that kind of the seeds of that. Look, what do we want to do? As fallen mortals, what we want more than anything is to control life. We want to pat ourselves on the back about how great we are. And we want to believe that we have the ability through our own righteousness or through our own actions to ultimately determine every single thing that takes place. Now, it's weird that we think that because we know it's not true. Now, there are people who still think that because they'll be like, oh, if only I would have prayed 8 times a day instead of 7, maybe then this terrible thing wouldn't have happened to me. But we know that evil things happen to good people. We know that very good people are placed in terrible circumstances. And that is the vicissitudes of mortality. It is not God rendering his judgment as someone being good or not good. So I think there's going to be so much missionary work going on in the spirit world that a lot of what this feels like will change over the course of time. Because if you're preaching to people for 1,000 years in the spirit world, then maybe the 50 years on earth won't seem quite as long.
So this next email comes to us from Christy of Christy's Corner fame.
Oh, wow. She emailed us back?
She did.
Okay. And did she grant us license to use her name in the way that we have? Or we'll have to say it was a different Christy.
I did have.
You know what? I know several people named Christy. That's who it's named after.
I did have a friend of mine that sent me a text of an interaction that he had with a friend of his, and she texted him and said, "Hey, I know you know Richard. I have this idea for Christy's Corner. I don't really have time to explain it. It's really confusing and stupid, but it's kind of funny. And so, but anyway, she gave an idea, and the idea was way better than anything we've actually done, by the way.
And we're not doing it now, right?
Well, of course not, because it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, we only do bad ideas.
But anyway, I thought that was very funny. So this is Christy's response to the doctors. Thank you so much for answering my question last week that we received the email a little bit ago. I put on your podcast as I got ready to mow the lawn and almost fell off my chair. I know that doesn't make sense. Unless, of course, it's a riding lawnmower, perhaps.
I was assuming that you're on a riding lawnmower, which can be very dangerous unless it has that kill switch. You need the kill switch, so as soon as you get up from it, it turns off. She's mowing the lawn. I'm guessing there's a rogue lawnmower just rolling through backyards everywhere.
She should have been working on her talk, obviously.
No, she already had that down. She listened to the podcast.
Anyway, I know that doesn't make sense. When I heard my name come up and you answered my email, it was so cool, and I shared it with everyone. I know, haha. Thank you. And yes, I love Christy's Corner, backwards R. You have my full permission to use it, not that you need it at all. You are the best, and I love your podcast even more.
But she didn't tell us how her talk went.
I'm sure if she listened to anything that we said, it went terrible.
Okay, Christy, we need you to email us again and tell us, did you use anything we talked about, or is Christy's Corner utterly futile? It has no actual purpose.
Well, so, we went with the alliteration on it. Christy's Corner doesn't even make any sense why it's called Christy's Corner, other than her name is Christy. So Christy's Corner, for those Orem missionaries, I ran into separate Orem. So I work in the Orem mission.
Do you just chase missionaries down all day?
I met other missionaries, and I didn't
force the podcast on them.
But that time I didn't talk about the podcast at all, because I'm like, it went so poorly before. I'm not even going to bring it up. Mm-hmm. And I'm not proud of the work.
And they brought it up to you?
They did not.
Okay.
No, because they don't listen to it.
Okay.
But so the whole idea of Christy's Corner is, look, why does anyone do anything religiously? It's so that they can talk about it in Sunday school.
No, why does anyone study the scriptures that they're supposed to study? No, it's so that they can.
Why does anyone do anything? It's so anything.
So it's Calvinist.
So some might say that faith is it's an action word. It's the thing that causes the action. I have to have the faith before I'm even doing anything. No. It is the desire to sound smart in gospel doctrine, which is why anyone does anything ever.
And so that's why we laugh about the fact that while we're on that topic of come follow me, everyone wants to know about section 50, right? Literally the week afterwards, people couldn't care about section 50 at all.
Which is why on the premium, we've been on section 20 for a month.
Okay, there's a problem. Section 20 is big. There was a lot to it, and we got bogged down in the creeds of Christendom and what the Westminster Confession of Faith had to say.
There's 2 episodes on that.
We're trying to help people understand. So it's kind of like what Liz was thinking about Calvinism. We're spending time on it.
This is true. But so the idea of Christy had to give a talk on Easter Sunday. Was a
last minute.
Yeah, she was late at. It wasn't her fault.
Nope, not her fault.
Wasn't her fault.
At least according to her.
She was obviously just saying that.
Get estimates on that.
Yeah, sure. So the idea so she asked us a question specifically for Easter and Garrett. And
there's very little time left because she just found out. So we got the email like a couple days before her talk. And so we needed to respond immediately.
Yeah, post haste, and then so Garrett gave a very good. I don't remember what it was about. Yeah, okay,
Obviously,
it wasn't very
it was
good.
so great you don't remember what I said.
I remember the last Christie's Corner because it was so Christie's Corner is supposed to be a quick hit, something that it's like 2 minutes, and it gives you something pithy to say in Sunday school,
something to make you look smart in Sunday school,
right? Because we're not going to get to section 49 or 50 for till next year.
I mean, maybe like we're going to skip over like
25,
part of 36.
23. Okay, great.
Yeah, we'll skip over part of 35 and 36. I mean,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, so I believe this week is 49 and 50.
Okay.
Dr. Corpus. Now this is Relief Society Elders Quorum.
Oh.
So, but still a great opportunity. If a couple were to listen to this podcast together as they, go to bed, they listen to the podcast, they say their prayers, obviously it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Then one person can make a comment in Relief Society, one person can make a comment in Elders Quorum.
I find it very interesting that you even led with that a married couple could listen to it, because what do we get from section 49? This is the revelation that comes as a result
the Shakers,
of the fact that the Shakers are quite a powerful influence in the Kirtland area, and several early members of the church come from this Shaker community. Now, you know what I should do just to test out our listeners? I should say, how many of you have ever interacted with a Shaker? Please email us and let us know. And what you would find is that we would receive dozens of emails from people that would say that they've met Shakers. Yeah. And the sad part about that is, no, they haven't.
They met perhaps a Quaker.
Right. They might have met a Quaker, or maybe they met a Jehovah's Witness, or
a Methodist.
Maybe they met a Latter-day Saint, But they haven't met a Shaker. I mean, maybe. I mean, if you've been to Sabbath Day Lake, Maine in the past 5 years, it's possible that you might have met one or two Shakers. Now, you couldn't have met 3 Shakers because there are only 2 Shakers left. There's only 2 Shakers left at all. Arnold and June. They are the last 2 known Shakers and followers, adherents of the religion. And the Section 49 is an interesting thing, because the Shaker doctrine surrounded a couple of things, and you get some of this from the heading, from the section heading. You know what I really could do? I could really spend some time on the dating of this section. We could spend 25 minutes on that.
Oh my gosh, just the dating.
Yeah. In fact, do we have? I think we did do that once.
We did.
Yeah.
I'll
Richard's going to put a link to
section
49 that we talked about in our first season, because we were talking about the dating that was in it, and some of the doctrines that are in there. But Lehman Copley is this converted Shaker, right, who has left his Shaker commune nearby, and he's so excited about the gospel that he wants the elders to go preach to the Shakers. And so this revelation, Sidney Rigdon, Parley Pratt, Lehman Copley, they go up and they preach, and it ends up being a total disaster. Shakers come from a religious movement in the late 1700s that was founded by a woman by the name of Mother Ann Lee. And a huge part of the Shaker belief was that marriage, in fact, so all sexual relations were wrong because they perpetuated sin. So think about this. If the goal is to create a sinless world, how in the world could you ever do that? Because if people are born sinners, then that means anyone being born means that there's still sin in the world. Now, the animals aren't sinners. In fact, many Shakers will become vegetarians and refuse to eat meat, although some won't, and you'll see some of that in the Revelation. But the biggest thing, and they actually call it taking up their cross. This is how they usually refer to lifelong celibacy. So if a married couple were to decide to join a Shaker commune, and they lived communally together, men living in separate living quarters from women, so they were sex segregated, but they lived on communal farms and in communal homes where they shared things in common. They were incredibly fastidious about living their life religiously, but they were also seen as essentially being apostates from general Christianity. And I think a Latter-day Saint could feel a little bit of sympathy for the Shakers, not just because, at least they're trying to do something about celibacy, but also one of the main reasons why other Christians are going to deem them heretical is that they have a different Christology or Christology than the rest of Christianity. So they are not your standard Trinitarian Christians. Shakers instead believed, and you get a little bit, like I said, you get a little bit of this from the section heading that says some Shakers forbade the eating of meat. Some of the beliefs of the Shakers were that Christ's second coming had already occurred and that he appeared in the form of a woman, Anne Lee. To provide a little bit more detail on that section heading, what Shakers believed, it's actually very interesting how, I don't want to call them all heretical doctrines, because Latter-day Saints are preaching doctrines that were once espoused by people like Origen. It's just that then they decided Origen was a heretic 300 years after he said it, But one of the early arguments about the nature of Christ was a Gnostic belief that that in fact Jesus was just a man, and that there was something called Christ spirit, or Christ is something different. That's the emanation of God. That had inhabited the man Jesus, and so Jesus Christ was two separate things. Jesus was the man, Christ was this God spirit, God power that had been on him, and that it had left him, and that's the reason why Jesus said, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" And so they don't believe that Jesus came back in power and glory and, took the form of Anne Lee. What they believe is that Anne Lee herself also lived a perfect life and had the fullness of this God-like Christ spirit rest on her, and that was Jesus' second coming. So it wasn't a coming in power and glory. It was a coming of this Christ spirit returning. Now, of course, that's deemed ridiculously heretical by other Christians, and Shakers are often persecuted. Sometimes people will say, well, why weren't they persecuted the same way Latter-day Saints were? Well, there are some very key reasons why they weren't. One is that while Latter-day Saints insisted on their rights as Americans and participated in voting and things of that nature, the Shakers did not. Secondly, the Shakers were not a radically growing sect. I mean, they were certainly growing in the 19th century, but there were never more than several thousand Shakers. Why? Well, it turns out that when you preach that to be a member of this religion, you have to be celibate for life, and that even if you are married, you and your husband then have to separate, and there is no legitimate sexual relations. All sexual relations are considered sinful. And so taking up your cross is what they call it. You take up your cross of celibacy and you live in this communal lifestyle. Well, I don't have to tell you that there's not a lot of natural population growth among Shakers. There's no child of record baptisms among Shakers because you are excommunicated from a Shaker community if you were, in fact, to get pregnant or to have sexual relations, because that's an essential part of their belief. There is some preaching, but primarily people join Shaker communes from the outside. They don't send missionaries out. They don't have child of record births. How did they grow at all? Well, many women fleeing abusive marriages are more than happy to go to the equality of treatment that they found in Shaker communes. Second, at a time when we actually had someone email and ask about adoption and how adoption worked. And while we won't be talking about this episode, there is no such thing as adoption laws in the United States, laws that govern a child being adopted. in any state in the United States until 1851. Okay, so long after Joseph Smith has been murdered, before even any states begin to regulate what happens with children if their parents are gone. Now, there are orphanages, but there aren't laws that are set up for them. They're all private affairs. And so Shakers became well known for the fact that if you had an unwanted child, you could go leave that baby on a Shaker commune's doorstep and like a fire station, and they would raise that child inside the Shaker community. And so one of the ways they grew was through adoption, was through people casting off their unwanted children at their doorstep. And so they grew in that way. When the later 19th century rolled around and the early 20th century, and they started to regulate things like children just ending up wherever, and you start to get child welfare laws, adoption becomes regulated. And that means people can't just dump a baby off on a Shaker commune anymore. And so that it leads to a pretty precipitous decline in Shakers. Now, that was probably way longer than we were supposed to go, right, Richard?
Well, no. So it allowed me to find the episode. So it was, all right. So of all of the things of the restored gospel that people would care to know, our 9th episode was about this.
Okay, so
that's hilarious.
So the audio is going to be bad.
Oh, it's going to be so bad.
It's going to be the same me, so it's going to still be bad.
I'll be talking less, which is great, though. That's a serious pro.
We had to goad Richard into speaking.
Yeah, it's been tough.
Yeah, we had. I mean, missionaries have to fight him off with a stick, but we have to force him to speak on the podcast.
Anyway, so I'm gonna re-release that as a bonus.
Oh, nice.
So people can listen to the full episode. But it's very interesting. So if you find that interesting, you can listen to an hour of it. The re-release at the same time as this, so that'll be a nice bonus. And thank you to Christy for making all of this happen.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, so this next email is about Hindus and Buddhists.
Right along the lines with Shakers, right? So it's a different type of Christianity, and now a different type of Eastern religion entirely.
So this email comes to us from Eric. As I continue enjoying catching up at 5 or 1.5x speed, would actually be better. Everyone should listen to this podcast on 5x speed.
I sound like I'm Alvin and the Chipmunks.
The only thing better than not listening to it at all is listening to it at 5x.
Well, that's what those missionaries were thinking.
That's true. 1.5x. I find myself experiencing twinges of angst every time I hear Dr. D suggesting that anyone who leaves the church is left only with the option of other Christian sects or being agnostic or atheist. This simply isn't true. They can also turn to offshoots and permutations of Hinduism, including Buddhism, Taoism, etc. There are also many offshoots in modern New Age philosophies, which often blend elements of Christianity and Eastern traditions. My own experience, and that of many, many people I know, is that there is much in the Eastern religion philosophies that is beautiful, appealing, and in many ways can be seen as in parallel with principles of the gospel. One can substitute a reincarnation cycle for eternal progression, and consequently see hope for all humankind and eventually advance in ways that could superficially be seen as similar to the plan of salvation, for example. Yes, their endpoint is usually some variation of disappearing into nothingness or oneness with the universe, which is an interesting parallel contrast to exaltation and becoming one with God, requiring adherents to abandon hope of eternal families, and so on. The email kind of goes on and on, but he goes on to make that claim that it sounds like a criticism, and I suppose it is, but I'm listening, loving it, and sending you feedback. Thank you, Eric.
I mean, we have. I mean, it sounds like you're still going through the podcast, and so we have of course referenced some of those things before, but having talked with people that are having faith crises on literally hundreds of occasions, I can say, at least from my anecdotal perspective, that not a single time have I had someone who legitimately considered the idea that if the church isn't true, then that means that they were going to become a Hindu. And so, I mean, a lot of it is really just the reality of who's listening. Sure. Is it possible that someone who apostatizes from our faith finds the beauty, and there is beauty in these religions? As Brigham Young said, all of their leaders were inspired by God for the truths that they have, right? The reality is that if you believe that Jesus is your Savior, it's very difficult to go from that to believing that Jesus is not. Because the same thing that makes you say Jesus isn't God pretty generally becomes the thing that makes you say there isn't a God at all. Now, in theory, sure. In theory, I mean, I've said multiple times that one of the aspects of Hinduism that is so, I think, impressive is that they've actually wrestled with the idea of fairness. Life is horribly unfair. People horribly suffer in this life. How can you make sense of it? And reincarnation helps do that. Well, the reason why you're poor and the reason why you've been treated like garbage and the reason why so many bad things have happened to you in this life is because in a previous life, you were a terrible person. So there's this idea of retributive justice that comes in that. And so look, certainly in theory, someone could say, well, if I don't believe that Jesus is God anymore, maybe I could go to Hinduism and believe that there's tens of thousands of gods. Richard's favorite god, right? The monkey god.
Hanuman.
It's his favorite god simply because the monkeys at the place get drunk off of
they get
the wine offerings.
absolutely blitzed, and they throw whatever it is that they throw.
Yeah, they're
300 drunk monkeys jumping out of bed. One falls off and
broke his head. Mom called the doctor, and the doctor said, no more Hennessy for the monkeys. I think what we deal with mostly on the podcast is practicality in that sense. Theoretically, could someone leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to become a Hindu? Yes. And even if someone says, oh, I anecdotally know someone who did, statistically, the number is so low that even if that's a theoretical possibility, it's not one that is enough in actuality. It's almost like President Oaks talking in conference.
Too few.
When he's talking about how everyone's going to a kingdom of heaven, he says, with exceptions too few to discuss here. Of course, President Oaks knows that there's some people going to outer darkness. But it's almost a waste of time to have that discussion in a general conference setting, because the point is almost everyone is going to heaven. That's the point to get across.
So, I mean, we tried to run some numbers. It's really tough given, what we know or what we don't know. So how many, Latter-day Saint resignations are there that exist per year? What does that number look like in the U.S. and globally? There was a Pew Research poll, a couple of them, that talk about people that leave their faith and where they go. And so we kind of tried to cobble that together. And based on the number of, global members of the church, it's 17.5 million, depending on, whether you subscribe to the Salt Lake Tribune or not, what in terms of what they would put as estimates of resignations. I mean,
2 million
per year,
per hour. Every 10 minutes, 75,000 people.
So, I mean, the number is an estimate based on those things, which are crude measurements, but it's going to be around 500 to 1,000 per year, like at the most, that would leave Latter-day Saints and go to Buddha. And the majority, the recommendation or the suggestion is Buddhism over Hinduism.
Sure, and in the United States at least. I mean, look, in other countries, it would make sense. I mean, both Buddhism and Hinduism are very cultural, just like Christianity is.
Yeah, my buddy that served in Cambodia, it was
so.
Sure.
So let's say you, converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in a majority Buddhist country. You could then see why, if someone apostatized from the church in that country, that they would go back to their traditional beliefs or their family beliefs. For our purposes in an English-speaking podcast, that is primarily directed to the English speaking world. Yes, I mean, I have at times had someone say, well, I've thought about aspects of Buddhism, but even those people ended up becoming agnostics. It is very difficult to go from believing you have a Savior, Jesus Christ, to believing that Jesus is just a man, and at the same time maintain the belief, in gods. Now, of course, in Buddhism, the ideas of peace, the idea of enlightenment, those are these powerful aspects of that allow people to do that. But I think that a lot of times among former Christians, not just former Latter-day Saints, there's a lot more, people. It's almost like someone saying, I'm spiritual but not religious kind of thing, where they say, oh, I follow Buddhism. But what they mean is they like some Buddhist teachings. Are they going to Buddhist temples? Are they actually practicing it in a way that would be recognized in other countries? Well, probably not. Again, anyone can find an exception. But statistically speaking, we don't spend a ton of time on that, primarily because that's not where people are going. I mean, as people leave our church, the numbers suggest that when they leave, they most often leave to agnosticism or atheism. They don't even leave to Christianity. And so I think, yeah, I mean, more cultural, religions, like Hinduism, where there's, 10,000 gods, actually more than that. That's a pretty tough sell for someone who believes that there's only one God to go from that to believing that. And so it doesn't happen very often. Could it happen? Of course. Has it happened? Of course. Is it what's going on with most of our followers? No. Most of our followers are confronted with, our listeners are confronted with differing Christian arguments about how the Jesus you believe in is the wrong Jesus, about how the salvation you espouse is the wrong salvation. It's much more difficult for someone to go to believing that there is no Jesus, that there is no salvation, that all of the Israelite history in the Old Testament, all of the Christian history in the New Testament, all of it's false, including the Book of Mormon is also false. When someone gets to that point where they're rejecting all of those things, they rarely dive into fully another religion, even if they admire some of its teachings and some of its tenets, because, it still wouldn't answer some of the questions, right? It wouldn't answer some of the questions of existence in that regard. So, fair point. But we will probably continue to focus primarily on Christianity simply because that's what nearly all of our listeners are, where they're coming from.
So, Garrett, this next one is a dander up kind of a question. Okay. We have about 15 minutes left in the episode.
Well, we may not get to it then.
Let's see how we do. This email comes to us from Katie, and the subject line caught your attention. Sex trafficking in the early church.
Oh, boy.
Yep, there we go.
And the dander's up. And
all right, so I'll read her email first and then the quote.
I'm hoping that the subject is her quoting someone,
it's a
hosting
someone,
something
sure.
somewhere.
Right,
Not the way that she's decided to describe it.
I don't believe that she believes this. That I think she's heard this and that she's like, what?
Yeah.
That's the way I choose to believe Katie's.
Okay,
email.
all right. Well, you choose a lot of things.
Well, I mean, she starts with
missionaries you're going to harass.
She starts with I love your podcast, which makes me think she has excellent taste.
Well, clearly she has terrible taste.
I love your podcast, and I'm slowly making my way through it from the beginning. I've had lots of friends and family leave the church, and I really enjoy learning from you on how to decipher some of these things from history. Can you please speak on this quote I attached? I know you're busy, but would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Sincerely, Katie. Okay, so here's the quote, It's from Heber C. Kimball.
So it's clearly a screenshot from either Instagram or
Facebooks,
Facebook. Yeah.
the Facebooks or the Instagrams,
the tweets,
the Twitters.
the Xverse.
Yes. Okay. So, it comes from something observing from afar, which is highly reputable, I'm sure, on the Facebooks or the Twitters.
How many Pulitzers did they win today?
So this is from Apostle. So this is Apostle Heber C. Kimball. So you know that they mean that with all the respect. And this is from the New York Times, April 17th, 1860. It was a great year for corn, by the way. Brethren, this is a quote. Brethren, I want you to understand that it is not to be as it has been heretofore. The brother missionaries that have been in the habit of picking out the prettiest women for themselves before they get here and bringing on the ugly ones for us, hereafter you have to bring them all here before taking any of them, and let us all have a fair shake.
Yeah,
Apostle Heber C. Kimball.
Through the roof. What does she have more commentary on that, or
no? That's all there.
Okay, there's a couple of problems here, and I don't want anyone listening to think that I am responding politically to what someone thinks or doesn't think the New York Times is today. I understand that in today's highly politicized climate, people they fight a lot of proxy wars with their political beliefs, to the point where if someone doesn't like Fox News, or someone doesn't like the New York Times, that they become the enemy simply because of the news outlet that they don't like, right?
Right.
But first and foremost, this little cut out of here. I let me just rant for a second.
Okay.
I'm pleading with everybody listening. I'm pleading. Nothing that you see as a cut and paste quote in an Instagram or X posting, in a Facebook post, should you ever take as totally true or accurate. If you find yourself being troubled by something that some anti-Mormon posts on the internet, you need to kind of take a step away from that. If you aren't able to let those things water off a duck's back, then you need to take a step back from it, because that's actually the goal. The goal of antagonists to attack portions of our faith and to cause us to doubt. And we don't have to be on Instagram. Now, I'm pretty sure we're getting a call from the attorneys of Instagram right now telling us that, yes, you do. You don't have to be on social media. You do have to have a testimony. I'm not saying this is the case with Katie, but I'm talking about generally for people. So if you find yourself on the daily frustrated, upset, troubled by antagonistic things that people post on the internet, it's almost like the angel told Joseph that his name would be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people. And you only need to be on social media for a second to know that that's true. So I would advise, first and foremost, you will never, ever be able to respond to every single salacious thing that is thrown out there. The very fact it is being thrown out there is a demonstration that the person doing it is not being an honest broker about the past or about your faith. So this, New York Times, April 17th, 1860, this quote that this person has posted on there, right? First and foremost, let's go to the actual article, because it's always good to go to the actual thing. And what do you find? This is April 17th, 1860, from Utah. This is from an unnamed person who's using a pseudonym who over the course of several months will write into the New York Times making all kinds of allegations about things happening in Utah Territory. The New York Times newspaper, and this might come as a little bit of a shock to some folks, so I need you to brace yourselves. The New York Times newspaper in 1860 was a highly partisan newspaper. It was not just all the news that's fit to print. It was all of the news that makes the Republican Party look good and the Democratic Party look terrible.
The New York Times.
The New York Times
that?
It was founded by two Whigs who then became Republicans. And all throughout this era, it is hyper partisan in its pro-Republican Party stance. And so at the time in 1860, the presidential election that's going through the country the Republican Party has an explicitly anti-Mormon platform. That in fact it's to just to exclude, demolish, whatever, eliminate the two twin relics of barbarism from the territory, slavery and polygamy. And Republican representatives in Congress and in the Senate are continually lashing out against Mormons generally and polygamy in particular, all throughout this time period. So first of all, who is the source of this quote? Well, we don't know because the person is an anonymous source. Well, can I find this talk being given anywhere else? Well, let's see if I can track it down a little bit more. If you were to read the sentence that the anonymous, that the Instagram, Facebook poster left out, why would they leave this out? It's weird. Why would they leave out the first part of this sentence? Because they started in the middle of a paragraph. It's interesting. Why would someone start in the middle of a paragraph?
Conditions of anonymity.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting. Some time ago, Heber Kimball was lecturing some missionaries who were preparing to start out on foreign missions in the tabernacle and said to them, okay, so what else do we have? We actually don't have a date for when this talk was supposedly given. Well, we can go look at our existing accounts of talks given in the tabernacle, and no one references this ever having been said. I mean, first and foremost, this almost sounds like something that would be a joke that someone might tell, right? In the 19th century, that would pass as a joke, right? But we don't know when it was said. We have no other record that it was said. And missionaries aren't going on their missions and marrying multiple women in England and then bringing them back home because they don't have the ability to marry polygamously on their missions. In fact, there are high-profile people who get excommunicated for entering into unauthorized plural marriages in the 1850s and 1860s. So this very claim, right? So the salacious claim is that Mormon missionaries are going out on their missions and they're just marrying every woman that they find and then coming back to Utah when really they need to just convert them and bring them back so that the apostles can decide which pretty ones they like. Yeah, that's going to get my dander up. Because not only is it salacious and false, there is legitimately no evidence from an anonymous source, from a newspaper dedicated to the destruction of my religion that is willing to lie about everything that what a great source, obviously. Oh, yeah, so this person just happens to know that? Yeah, they were there for that? Well, it wasn't happening in practice, so I guess it didn't get implemented the way Heber Kimball wanted it to be. I mean, let's take some other examples of these correspondents from Utah and the things that they have to say about Utah at the same time period in articles that are very similar to find out, well, wait a minute, what kind of a source am I looking at? Always the first thing you should ask from any source that someone is presenting to you. Who created the source? When was it created? What was the purpose of its creation? What is the context of its creation? And are there any other corroborating sources that demonstrate that what is in that source is accurate? Well, you know what? Let's go to another article from the same newspaper, from these same unnamed Utah correspondents. It is an established fact that the mass of the people of Mormons are religious fanatics, acknowledging only one spiritual and temporal head, holding it a religious duty and bound by every interest to obey the decrees of the church. It becomes an important question to ascertain the purposes and pretensions of the church. The Mormon religion has for its foundation a belief that Joseph Smith was sent by God, that a new revelation was made through him, that he was ordained as an apostle by the spirits of Peter, James, and John. Actually, it was by the resurrected Peter and James, and then John is still in. Anyway, hey, at least they said it, right? And received a dispensation for the gathering of the saints of all nations. Brigham Young is the divine successor to Smith, and like him receives from God revelations for the guidance of the saints. The unexpected success of the Mormon religion may have given birth to grander views. The disciples of the Mormon church are now to be found in every land and every clime. Visions of empire and unlimited power over millions of subjects may now haunt the brain of Brigham Young. This almost unparalleled spread of Mormonism ought surely to move the American people to a just consideration of their evil, while yet within the bounds of our own country. So obviously, I like how when he reports middle of the road, no editorializing.
No, it's very straightforward.
Yeah. This is an article in which he's lamenting the fact that the army is going to be withdrawn from Utah and not used militarily against the Latter-day Saints. That's the point of this article. Like, you need to start using the military on them.
Well, because of what?
Because they're Mormons.
Well, because what was said about what the missionaries do, bringing home all the ugly women.
Yeah, we got to stop them.
We got to stop them.
Between the Mormon religion and our Republican government, there is an irrepressible conflict. In the one case, the power is in the hands of a single man, and the other, the hands of millions. A lasting settlement cannot be anticipated until the Mormons cease to be Mormons or cease to inhabit the United States. So this is a person who is calling either for Mormons to be exterminated or for them to be removed. But you know what? Let's take what his morality is on marriage laws. Yeah, it's clearly.
Is it possible that he heard that quote and that's why he's saying this, as opposed to his bias?
Since the article I'm reading is before.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Again, while they have that date on there to make it look legitimate, that's the date that it was published in the New York Times. But even this horrifically biased writer himself says some time ago, doesn't give you a date. Why wouldn't he give you a date? Because if he gave you a date, then you'd be able to look it up. And he doesn't, because it didn't happen. And that's why you don't get a date. When someone's like, oh yeah, at some point it happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you know it word for word. You know exactly what was said. You wrote it all down at the time. You just don't remember what day you wrote it down on. And you don't even say a week ago. You don't even say a couple weeks ago. Some time ago.
So, I mean, the reality. So let's give this person the absolute benefit of the doubt. The person, the New York Times, okay?
I'm giving him no benefits.
I know, but let's.
He wants the extermination of Mormons. No benefits of the doubt.
Let's hear him out. Let's hear him out. No, but let's say in this particular case, somebody who's been to Utah comes to him,
this guy's living in Utah. See, he's a person living in Utah, or at least claiming to, and he reports back on the weekly and the monthly to the New York Times, claiming to have heard these things himself.
All right, go on.
Yeah, it makes it tough, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
But without attaching his name to anything. So it's all anonymous. So look, in today's day and age, no one ever makes salacious allegations through anonymous sources. It only happened back in the 19th century. So that's the nice part, is we've evolved.
1860, actually. Yeah. I think really the only time that it may have happened.
Is just in April of 1860.
That's right.
The one time it happened. Okay. let me go on to quote some more of him. All legislation on the subject, if the Mormons are to remain in our midst, must necessarily look to overthrow the Mormon church. And history gives us no example of a religious sect having been subdued by force. The only remedy is the severe one of removing these polygamists from the country and depriving them of their leaders and patiently teaching the people to become Republicans and freemen. That's called genocide and ethnic cleansing, just so everyone's aware. So what he is advocating is wholesale murder, forced re-education, and expulsion from the country. But you know what? Super great source on the morality of Heber C. Kimball. Obviously, the person who's advocating the expulsion and extermination of hundreds of thousands of people, super moral. I'm glad that we're taking our morality tips from someone like that, who is such a coward, by the way, isn't even willing to put their name on their claims of extermination.
Could it have been Heber C. Kimball?
Heber C. Kimball. So maybe Heber C. Kimball's just running the deep game. Brigham Young's like, I can't figure out where these leaks are coming from. And Heber C. Kimball's like, I don't know, but I know that I'm sad about ugly wives. And I don't know. Now, there are multiple different anonymous people that are reporting from Utah at the time. So maybe there are different people. Likely they're the same person or look, people were not above making up things. One of the greatest things I ever read when I was doing my dissertation was a newspaper article that got reported everywhere that the Mormons had rebelled against the United States during the Mexican War, and that they'd perpetrated a great massacre against other people, and that was a huge, and got reported all over the United States. Then like 3 weeks later, like, oh, I guess that didn't actually happen. I mean, and it was very small. The retraction not printed everywhere. But the point is, when there's a hated minority group, when there's a hated religious, ethnic, racial minority group, the majority does not need evidence of what's being claimed because they already hate the group. I mean, here's another example from another article from this fine fellow. Everyone who has ever thought about the subject regards Mormonism as a political, social, and moral evil, and almost everyone looks forward to its speedy elimination. But I mean, I'm sure he was like, quoting exactly what Heber C. Kimball said, because he's clearly just being a reporter.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's a reason why when someone is attempting to hurt your faith online, you have to just brush past it. Because do you think the person who posted that went to the original article to get this?
No.
Of course not. Someone 15 people removed from that person put it up thinking, what a great thing I can prove to these Mormons about da-da-da. By the way, where in America could women file for their own divorce from their husbands in 1860?
Utah.
Yeah. So only in Utah in the 1860s are laws that actually protect women in marriages.
Well, so but Utah and New York, though, right?
No. In fact, women are going to be voting in Utah for 50 years, half a century before they're voting in New York. Half a century. New York doesn't have women voting until they are forced to by the constitutional amendment. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, and he has lots of articles like the only women in Utah don't want to be here and they don't leave because they're afraid to leave. They don't have any rights except the right to vote and the right to own property and the right to get a divorce. But other than that, I mean, other than the rights that we don't grant any women anywhere else in the rest of the United States, they don't have any rights. I mean, look, obviously there's hyperbole that's going on. This character is clearly an antagonist, and He and it's probably the same person. It might be two different people. They write under the name of Richard, which I find interesting.
Well, you know what? Let's hear him out again.
They either call themselves Richard or they sometimes call themselves Observer.
That's my nickname.
Yeah, Richard the Observer.
Yeah.
So Richard's new
Dr.
name,
Richard
Dr. Richard the Observer.
Dr. Leduc.
Yeah, and he just laments the Mormons. They're not planning to leave Utah. They're not planning to leave Utah. We can never get rid of them. I don't think, listeners, I know I've talked about it before. We talked about it with Abraham Lincoln. Our listeners do not fully understand the level of political hatred that was aimed towards the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know about it tangentially. You know about it as a kind of like, oh, I've heard that the government was against us. But I think it's probably fair to quote what's going on in the Republican Party at this time. This is a part of a speech from one of the leaders of the Republican House in 1860. April 24th, 1860. So a week after this newspaper article reported this about the Mormons. This is a speech by Stephen C. Foster, not the same Stephen Foster who, oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with a
Okay, that's what I thought it was.
That's not who it is.
Oh,
no.
It's the different one.
No, it's different.
Different
Stephen
C. Foster.
Yeah. So this is the title of his speech, and this speech was given in Congress, and then the Republican Party thought his speech was so great, they published thousands of copies of it and distributed it everywhere. This is the title. Republican Land Policy, Homes for the Million. Well, that sounds, you know what? That sounds good.
Yeah.
This is about the Homestead Act. Give the public lands to the people and you settle the slavery question. Okay, I'm on board. You obliterate the frontiers. Okay, probably some Native Americans may not be very happy about that. You'll dispense with the standing army. Okay. Savings, great. And extinguish Mormonism.
Interesting.
The title of the speech is that if you pass the Homestead Bill, you will extinguish Mormonism. This is the Republican Party, and it is their platform. And they are far from censuring him for what he has to say in here. They are publishing this everywhere.
So, two things. I know that we're out of time. You had me read the discussion relating to the Idaho Constitution, and we should do an episode or 19-part episode on that. It was infuriating.
It's pretty awful, and that was 30 years after this,
right?
35 years after this. But
the second part is extinguish Mormonism. I think of the guy from the movie about missionaries. And I caught on fire I
caught on fire.
Well,
I never thought I could.
And he's
called to serve, man.
Called to serve, and he's trying to extinguish it. That's my first.
They're trying to serve. They're not going to.
But I mean, it's infuriating.
Well, here's some parts of his talk. We could read the whole thing, but it's very, very, very long. During the last 80 years, from small beginnings and with small means, we hazard little in the prediction that the whole of our territories may within 20 years become more organized. So it's going on and on about, hey, look, all of our territories are being organized. It's great, wonderful. There is an evil which the remoteness of and wilderness of our immense territories has fostered into fearful importance. I allude to polygamy, that foulest product of the 19th century, which seems to denote a decline in civilization. Mormonism, we are aware, sprung up in the older states, but polygamy was unheard of until the saints removed beyond the reach of civilization. In Missouri and Illinois, that fanatical and persecuted sect was suspected of some of these practices inconsistent with morality. But it was not until they felt themselves secure in the mountain fastness of Utah, 1,000 miles beyond the frontiers of civilization, that they threw off all disguise, apparently Heber C. Kimball's disguise, since he's the one, right? And shocked the moral sense of the country and the world by the open practice of polygamy. They feel secure from molestation in that remote and not easily accessible region. We know what their history has been. They have publicly defied the government. They have trampled the laws of Congress. And notwithstanding the millions of money that has been spent in sending an army out to subdue them, still they revel in licentiousness. They insult your judges, they mock your army, and murder your citizens. And then he goes on to say that there's an anti-polygamy bill that's been introduced, but he's worried that it won't be supported. I have no constitutional doubt or scruple, because, the Constitution forbids making laws against someone's religion, but I have no constitutional doubt or scruple about voting to suppress a practice which is a felony at common law and an insult to decency and morality, because the problem is polygamy is legal in Utah territory, and the federal government, this law is going to say that it's illegal everywhere, even though states, at least ostensibly, have the right to make their own marriage laws. The fact that a practice so monstrous has sprung up in one of the organized territories of the Union proves the necessity of a general law to prohibit it, not only in Utah, but in all of the territories. But who is to put the law in force in Utah? There, the institution of polygamy has become permitted to grow up in such proportions as to defy the suppression by any ordinary legal process. The whole population sustain it and practice it, or desire to practice it. So the one sitting on the sidelines like, oh, I wish I could. Who is to put the law in force? The Mormons? Have we no experience with the integrity of Mormon sheriffs and Mormon juries? Have they not screened or acquitted the most heinous murderers who murdered in the cause of polygamy? I don't even know what he's making as a reference there, but let me just say this. I mean, I don't want to be that guy, but how dare you? How many people served time for the massacre of men and children and the wounding of women at Haun's Mill in Missouri? We know, literally, we have a list of all of the people that were in the militia, the Missouri State Militia, that massacred and murdered unarmed children there. How many of them served jail time? Oh, 0 of them? Interesting. Because in the land of liberty, the juries and the judge, well, there wasn't even a jury because there was no arrests that were even made. There's 200 people in the mob that murdered Joseph and Hiram Smith and attempt to murder John Taylor and Willard Richards. How many people go to prison for a murder which literally hundreds of people witnessed? 0 people. How many people go to prison for murdering Edmund Durfee, shooting him in the back outside of Nauvoo? Nobody. The claim that an American can't get justice in a Mormon court is as much a tail wagging a dog as I have ever heard. Latter-day Saints, one of the reasons why Joseph finally made the decision that they would have to leave the United States is that they could not get justice in the United States. One of the reasons why no one was convicted in the trial of the murderers of Joseph and Hiram Smith? Because the judge barred all Mormons from serving on the jury. Now, Hancock County is primarily made up of Mormons, which means accidentally, if you're just throwing names out of a hat, a majority of the people on that jury are going to be Mormons. And the judge barred Mormons from serving on the jury. But, it's totally fair court. It's interesting. People will say things sometimes like, that what people claim that you're doing is what they're doing themselves. Man, the claim that, Latter-day Saints, they're the ones who don't have a real judicial process. You mean like the ones that the Latter-day Saints got in New York and in Ohio and in Missouri and in Illinois and in Iowa, by the way. Similarly, same thing. It is a claim that is ridiculous to act as if that somehow everything was good, but now it's not. But I'll just leave you with this quote from Representative Foster. The only way to render the abolition of polygamy effectual is to encourage the settlement of the territories as rapidly as possible. If such a law were passed, a very few years would suffice to fill the territories with population and overwhelm the polygamists of Utah beneath the advancing tread of Christian civilization. I mean, it's hard for a Latter-day Saint today to hear, but this Republican Party is going to become the masters of the government, only a few months later, with the secession crisis that takes place after Lincoln is elected. And this Republican Party, with these Congress people and these senators, are the ones who are going to start passing anti-Mormon bills that are expressly anti-Mormon. Not just bills that sometimes affect Mormons, but laws that are designed to take away their religious rights. And it's not just that. I mean, someone listening might go, well, yeah, but polygamy's bad, so it should take that right away. Okay. What about laws that take away the rights for Mormons to serve on juries? What about laws that take away the rights for women to vote in Utah Territory? I want to help the women in Utah so much, I'm going to give them their freedom by taking away their right to vote. I mean, there's no way of getting around that. And so, yeah, my dander gets up when there's something that someone's saying that's antagonistic towards the church from 1860, especially from an unnamed source, from a meeting that I don't know that ever happened, from a without any corroborating evidence, from a claim about a practice that wasn't actually going on, and from a political organ that is dedicated to the extermination and destruction of my church. So yeah, no, I don't super take it seriously, and hopefully no one else does either. And so I adjure you, I plead with you, don't take anything that someone puts in a pithy quote on X or a screenshot on Facebook at face value. If they were trying to be honest with you, they would have already provided the actual source and the actual context and the actual explanation. And they're not doing that. And why aren't they doing it? Well, 9 times out of 10, they don't even know what those things are. In which case, why in the world would I listen to someone who doesn't even know where their quote came from? If the person talking to you about something doesn't know where they got their quote, then they should not be listened to at all. Second, for the very few times that they even do know where it comes from, their entire purpose isn't to give you the whole story, or they would have given you the entire antagonistic article. And you would have read, holy cow, this guy is an anti-Mormon fanatic that wants Mormons exterminated. Instead, they cut out a supposed quote from a supposed leader, put their own supposed spin on it, and then handed it to you and said, hey, what do you think about this? As they did their 720 off a mogul, yelling their extreme anti-Mormonism. So my advice for everybody is, if you find yourself being pained by the constant flood of online attacks, pull back a bit. Do some more blocking. Do some more, careful realization that when people are not good faith actors, they will not act in good faith. And that is something that I think is important to understand. So thank you so much for joining us. Sorry that we went a little over time. Richard's over here hating himself.
It's great.
Yeah.
Really great work.
He can't wait to read to you the political debates about the Idaho Constitution. It's his favorite thing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Garrett Dirkmott and Dr. Richard Leduc. If you know of anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.